All right. Last week, okay, so presentations are coming up. If folks online if you haven't, I think everybody has actually has noted that whether they're going to do a face-to-face presentation or a voiceover recorded presentation. All of the four of you have online. I think all of you have. So folks that are not streaming, be sure you get that listed immediately because we start them next week. And it'll just be kind of random. Everybody should be ready to present them next week. We won't get to everybody. We've got 20 some students. How many do we have? 22? I don't know. I got 27 and $5.99 next semester. Shoot. That's like teaching 2 classes. Mm-hmm. So,
Dr. Stewart.
So, yo.
I'm weird about this kind of stuff. I'm not good at technology, so whatever night that I'm presenting, I'd like to be present there.
Okay, we love it when you are present.
I did that last semester and whatnot.
I love it. When do you want to show up? Do you want next week or the week after Thanksgiving?
Of course, if I'm picking, I'm going to say the week after Thanksgiving, but I'll show up whatever time you tell me to because I just will be happy to be present.
It's up to you. People who drive in for this, they get some leverage or they get some flexibility.
Yes, ma'am. Then I would say the week after Thanksgiving would be perfect for me.
I'll put you down for that. In fact, why don't you go in the discussion board and said, Dr. Stewart said I could present on the Wednesday after Thanksgiving.
Yes, ma'am.
So I'm reminded of that. Everybody else is either, Megan, what are you doing?
Not right now.
No, I mean, not
What are you? What are you presenting?
Oh, I was gonna do like streaming in and talk about it where you can hear me.
Okay.
Like have a thing.
Okay.
I'll send you a PowerPoint.
Okay, very good. That sounds good. So then I think that we can get started on the rest of class today.
I have a question about this bibliography. For each article, I put a short summary, and then at the end of each summary, I'll put 1 or 2 sentences saying that why I think this article is suitable for my edited collection. Should I keep it or I should cross it off? I'm not sure whether we should include such answer.
It should be evident.
Okay, so you don't need us to say why you think.
No, it should be evident. If it's not, then
Okay, sure.
yeah.
So only the summary with the sentence.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right, I told you we're talking about subjectivity, the difference between subjectivity and identity last week, and I said I'd kind of give you some more information on that. Roberta Salinger tried with work in Waking Sleeping Beauty, Feminist Voices, I don't remember the rest of it. So she's the one who really pushed this idea that let's not talk about identity, because if we're teaching now and thinking about texts during our world now, then we need to be able to talk about it in contemporary terminology and scholarship. And subjectivity is one subject, and subjectivity and multiple subject positions. Those are terms associated with being able to talk about something other than identity. So when it comes, so you can think about it kind of like this. A subject in a sentence is the main thing. It's the doer. An object receives action. So we can say perhaps the subject has some kind of agency, and by agency I mean the ability to act on one's behalf. Of course, we never are fully free to act on our own behalf because we can't always be aware of the things that influence us. I know I'm constrained by all kinds of things. when I perform as a subject. And that might be my attitudes, it might be my surroundings, it might be inadequate knowledge, it might be just the influence of culture on me that I'm not aware of, or that I'm subject, that influences me. So we're never really full agents. We might think we are, but it's an illusion. And what we tend to do is just not think about that, you know, to think that we have free will and that we have, when we decide that we want to do something, we can do it, and that means that we have agency. So with the subject supposedly has agency, an object doesn't have agency so much because it is acted upon. It's just like a sentence. A direct object gets acted upon. The subject is usually the actor in that situation. But of course, subject could be turned around a little bit, because if you're the queen's subject, you're not a subject, you're an object. You work at the behest of the queen. She tells her people what they should do, and you know, they are called her subjects. So in some ways, they're subjects, but they're not. They're also objects. And we all work within those contrasts and contradictions. We are both subjects and objects frequently at the same time. Which kind of sets us up as to saying, well, then where does this identity thing come in? Where it's supposed to be fixed, where there's supposed to be some kind of essence. How can we ever know what our essence actually is if we don't know everything that's influencing us? We can't. I suspect that there are some things one is born with, like serial killers. What is that? What are they?
Sociopaths or psychopaths.
Psychopaths. I mean, there are some children who display those characteristics really, really, really early in life and have a normal home life. But something goes wrong somewhere. And in some ways, being a subject and having subjectivity is very liberating, because we can change who we are if we want to. And if we know how we want to change it, and if we have that potential. With identity, with that essence, there is no changing. So that's not so then a person who commits crimes all the time can't ever change. That might be that person's essence, identity, whatever. So in some ways, being the sense of having this subject position and subjectivity is very liberating in how we can produce ourselves and perform in our lives and in our world. And then we also stand in multiple subject positions. So, and we talked about this a little bit. I'm sure you're a little bit different in different circumstances. I don't talk to my mom and dad about subject positions. I talk to them about my horse, and I talk to them about class, and I talk to them about politics a little bit. And mainly, you know, though my language is elevated and mom and dad get frustrated at me because they don't always know what I'm talking about, but that's okay, because that's who I am as this person right now. I wasn't 20 years ago, not in the least. The ideas that I have now, they would have never occurred to me. But education and work and all of those things have changed me dramatically. So I think I possibly have an essence of wanting to do right, having an overdeveloped sense of responsibility, guilt, those kinds of things. But those could be from my upbringing. But I always hope that I will do the right thing. I don't know if I will. I don't know if I would try to save somebody in a fire, run in and, drag somebody out. I don't know that. I won't know until it happens. I would hope that I would report a crime that I see, regardless of the circumstances of it maybe putting me in danger if I did so. I hope that I will do that, but I don't know. Somebody says, we'll kill your parents. Then I'm probably not going to. But I want to, but I probably won't. So we stand in these multiple subject positions where this way here, we're this way there. Get a couple of martinis in me, I'm a different person entirely. So tell me a little bit about your subject positions and where you are in different subject positions and the noticeable differences you see. Jolene.
So, okay, so I deal with children almost every day, like 14-year-old children, right? So I don't have any children of my own yet, but I can imagine that I would not treat my children the way I treat the children at school, because I have a lot of grace with the children at school. Like, I'm a lot more understanding. Like, I don't know what their home life is like. I don't know necessarily all the things they're going through. I know, though, that, like, from what I know of the school and the students I've always taught, I know that their life has not been easy. And so I grace them and I love them. And, like, if my kid would try to do something like that, I can guarantee you I would have a completely different reaction.
Mm-hmm.
Because I reached you better than that, kind of thing. So I can already see that dichotomy coming up. But also, like, just the way my mom and I were talking about this, I always say that, but, like, my mom and I used to be really, really tight, like, really close. And recently, like, we haven't been as close. And so, like, we were talking the other day, like, I've been trying to coax her to leave a toxic situation where she is and move to Lubbock with my brother, because that's where her grandbabies are. Like, I think she'd be happier there. But she told me, I don't ever want you to say that to me again. Like, I'm tired of hearing you say it. I don't want to hear it anymore. And it sucks that there are things that we just can't say to each other anymore. And I'm like, but who put that there? Like, it wasn't me. And so, like, our relationship is changing, and it's been changing. Like, I've been married for 2.5 years now, and we're still trying to figure out exactly what our relationship looks like now that she has me only part-time. She's not, like, one of my top priorities anymore, because I have a family of my own. So trying to figure out,
it's hard
that
negotiating that
too.
Have any of you ever said about your parents, I will never do that to my kids?
I try not to.
I can't believe I am not ever going to do that. Has anybody ever said that? And then what happens? Or not even your kids, but I would never say something like that. I would never do that. What are you thinking, parents? And then I hear myself saying and see myself doing exactly what I said I wouldn't do. Like, fly off the handle. I'll never get mad like Mom. Oh, yes, I can. I take drugs for it, but I can. Especially if I'm not medicated, I can. So she needs to be medicated, too. She's better when she is, but she doesn't. But I can even hear myself sounding the same tone of voice. I can hear it. It's like, I am not myself. This is not who I am. And all of a sudden, I'm occupying a subject position that I don't really want to occupy.
Right.
So, and I can change that. Emily, what about you?
I notice it at work, just because I'm used to working retail, and this is my first semester where I'm teaching, and I'm kind of like in charge of these students, and like they're looking to me, and I love that because I like being in that role. But then, like, some Mondays I'll teach in the morning and then I'll go work at James Avery at night.
It's weird.
So it's really weird then interacting with a customer and the customer trying to tell me how to do my job, And I can't be like, no, you don't know what you're talking about. I have to be like, well, ma'am, I'm so sorry that you're unhappy. What can I do to fix that? When I really want to be like, you can leave the store because you don't know what you're saying. So just things like that get really frustrating that I didn't really notice before because when I was working in retail.
Damned education.
Yeah, I was just kind of like, oh, well, like that's what we're taught. The customer's always right. And they're not. So
That's one of the that's one of the issues I take with a university calling its students customers. Because they do. Our library has customer service. Because we live in a culture where the customer is always right. And
Yeah.
I'll be damned if an 18-year-old is going to tell me that he's right and I'm wrong when I know I'm right.
yeah, so it's kind of a weird dynamic. And then just like at home, I've kind of dealt with this for a while now, but with my mom being sick and my dad not around, I've kind of like where my mom used to be, especially right after my dad left when I was still in high school, she was very much like the stable, solid person in my life. And I depended on her for so much. And as I've gotten older, I'm seeing that as she's getting sicker, she's depending on me more to be there for her. And so I'm finding that like I can't get upset really around her because then it doesn't upset her, but I know it hurts her. And so she's already hurting enough. So I'm kind of having to find where I get upset on my own, or I go to like my boyfriend and I talk to him about it. But then my mom kind of notices that I'm not coming to her as much anymore. And so that then I found recently, like in the past 2 weeks, has worried her because she thinks that
They never stop.
yeah. So I'm like, I don't know what to do. But just stuff like that you don't really see until you kind of step back and look at it and kind of just think about things. And it's hard, but that's also life.
Yeah.
So
I out and out lied to my parents. They really get upset when I drive in the dark. My mom does. I mean, to the point that she's neurotic about it.
mm-hmm.
And so in order for me to do the things I want to do, when I leave their place, I leave about noon. And now if I left at noon, I'd get home and still be light. Get back here. But I usually stop and ride my horse for a couple hours. So what I do is I map out my trip as if I'm actually leaving when I say I'm leaving, and call them along the way. I say, all right, I'm in Oklahoma getting gas.
That's genius.
I do it. That's how I do it. I leave at 5 o'clock in the morning and I don't call them until 8 saying, I'm leaving now. That gives me 3 extra hours to do whatever I want to do, which is usually ride. So yeah, it's a tough one, isn't it? I don't suppose that has anything to do with anything. Except I can't believe I'm doing that. I can't believe I'm going to those lengths to protect my parents. That is not who I have been in the past. That's for sure. And for certain, I can see it with my dad. There is no such thing as essence. He's got dementia. What is his essence? Who is he? I don't even know how to talk about him and being a subject or an object or anything else. He just kind of exists, but not really. So I don't even, that kind of idea really complicates the notion of identity and essence. But we all are like that to some degree because we have to change. If not, then think if I were really rigid about everything in class, how would you survive? Really? So we have to be able to change. So what she says is it deals with how sometimes we think that we make language work for us, that we do the defining, but language, according to some theorists, defines who we are. So the concept of subjectivity then implies that every individual is multiply constructed by a variety of sociolinguistic forces that act upon her or him. Because language and the institutions it presents are so fluid, any given individual can occupy simultaneously a number of subject positions, some of which can seem at times even contradictory. Judith Butler reminds us being female constitutes an entire range of subject positions that can never be stable or uniformly defined. There is very little agreement, after all, on what it is that constitutes or ought to constitute the category of woman. And the same, of course, is true for men. Is it physical? Is it hormonal? Is it attitudinal? What is it that makes a man and a woman, except for perhaps the linguistic forces that act upon us, telling us who we should be? The unconscious, Jacques Lacan indicated that language is the sole determinant of being. He believed that the unconscious is that which, by speaking, determines the subject as being. So when we become communicating subjects, and it doesn't have to be speaking. It doesn't have to be speaking. That's limited. That's nearsighted. Because not everybody is able to speak. But it's that thought process that determines the subject as being. And when it comes to interpolation, it's language that interpolates us. Institutions through language. Post-structural critics define the subject as constructed by language and by the exterior forces that language asserts upon the individual. So it's a little bit more, talking about identity is a little bit more complicated. So sense of identity, sense of self, because we all have those. We have a sense of who we think we are, but can we ever say exactly who we are? And how do we know that's who we are? Don't think about it too long or it'll mess with you. Mm-hmm. And that's what some theorists have said, some that disagree with postmodern concepts, that it's too nihilistic to think of ourselves as subjects and subject positions, that we do have an identity, a sense of who we really and truly are. It's kind of naive.
That would mean that anytime a friend of yours said something that surprises you about yourself, I mean, that wouldn't happen.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Unless they just aren't very observant or haven't been observant.
They're totally missing the mark. Right, but usually.
And so the subject is who she is because language has so fashioned her. This is Francis Jacques formulates the thesis that subjects only develop a sense of self-identity if they are able to think of themselves in the first person as I, in the second person as you, and in the third person as he or she. And we know that that's part of child development because initially it is only I and me. That's it. And the mother is even me, in that and Lacan goes into great detail about that particular stage of life where there is no differentiation between mother, the world, me. It's all me. And then acknowledging, it's like the cat that walks by the mirror and sees itself and it does this and does this. And the mirror creature does the same thing. It's then that the cat realizes something odd is going on here, and it isn't just me, even though that's my mirror image. There are other things in the world. Look, I can see that in the mirror too. And babies are that way too. And culture, our society, often serves as that mirror. So that when I look at you, you mirror back to me some things. It takes some time to get wrapped around these concepts. I worked on them for years, trying to really understand it. But the problem is, in a postmodern world, you can never really fully understand anything. That's refreshing, isn't it? It is exhausting. Okay, so that I hope kind of helps if you are interested in looking into that more. Roberta Seelinger-Treit's Waking Sleeping Beauty. The chapter especially is subjectivity as a gender issue. Now she's dealing specifically with a feminist approach, so she's not talking necessarily about boys, males, men. She's that, and this is pretty old, when feminism was kind of new in how one approached children's literature. I mean, she wrote the book on it, though, and this is it. All right, so we can get started now on, let's see what we've got going for the, I saw some of these great titles. So when you see this 93 unread discussion posts and 19 new assignment submission files, it doesn't mean I haven't read those discussion posts. The way I read them doesn't always register. So to give you an example, well, before we get started on that, do you have any questions on your presentation and what you need to do or want to do? I'm pretty fluid on it. Just teach us something. Tell us about this wonderful edited collection. Think of it as of your presentation as a sales pitch, kind of, as to why you should buy this very expensive book, because we all know academic books are ridiculously expensive. So you know, saying that this is I don't know, they're like that Little Red Readings. Hubler says nobody talks about children's literature like this because they're afraid to use the word Marxism, and we need to do that. So, and that's, you know, that's the gist of her entire book. And I read it, A, because I was asked to review it, and B, because it's Marxism in children's literature, and that's kind of the area that most fascinates me, one of the areas that most fascinate me. So it was an easy sell to me. Of course I'm going to read that. It will broaden my knowledge, although I didn't like all the essays in it. Probably the favorite book that I read and also reviewed it was the Mother's book that you have the introduction to. Your presentation in. Those of you who are doing live recording or doing voiceovers, you can drop off your presentation there. If it's too big and doesn't fit, there are a couple of ways to do it, through sending me a link, but I don't always have the best luck with things like that. So contact me if you're having trouble uploading it. Sometimes you just have to delete your cookies, clear your cookies. That doesn't mean throw up, like, you know, drink too much and toss your cookies. Yeah, toss your cookies. Let's rename that cookie thing as tossing your cookies.
Dr. Stewart, for
Yes.
those of us who are going to be basically like presenting it like we're there, how do we do the? We just submit it through that link, through the Dropbox.
Well, is it going to be a PowerPoint?
Yeah, my presentation is going to be like a PowerPoint.
Okay, so you just drop the PowerPoint off in the presentations Dropbox, and I'll show it. I'll go to the different slides as you tell me to do. So,
Okay.
And that'll work just fine.
You can also share your screen through Zoom, and then you can control how quickly you go through it. I've done, like in Dr. Carter's class, we could share our screen so that you don't have to say, okay, next slide, if that's easier for you.
Do you know how to do that?
I don't. I'm a dunce when it comes to technology, so.
Super simple. Like it's just I think it's at the top of the screen. You just click share my screen or something like that. But now
That's best. Yeah.
Okay. If I can figure out how to do that, sure.
now, of course, as I'm saying,
If not,
but
and if it doesn't work, you'll tell me to continue, and I'll do that.
Okay.
It'll work both ways. All right, so what'd you think about Esperanza Rising? You loved it? Other thoughts?
Well, Dr. Stewart, I tell you, since you've asked, I thought that one, I couldn't help but think before I even read it that if Dr. Stewart assigned this to us to read, it has to be one of the greatest books of all times. And so I went
That
into
is not true.
mindset, and because I think I started off thinking that way, I wasn't disappointed. It just reinforced how much I enjoy this class when I read a book like that. It was really good.
Keep it up, Greg. Hey!
No, it was good. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it quite a bit.
I did. Some of you have been in classes that I have assigned really crappy books. Has anybody in this group? Oh, they were pain.
Oh, I liked that one. It was weird, but I like twisted weird things.
17th Summer. When I assigned 17th Summer, which was written in like 1956, and it's a romance. It was early It was a hugely popular book, but anybody who reads it now just finds it completely meaningless. So, and they hate it. They hate it. It's when a girl turns 17 and she's on summer break waiting to go to college, and it's during her 17th summer that she begins a relationship with a boy, and it's so different than what most adults know because of the dating habits at that period and how reputations were ruined and made so easily. And they are now, but it was just a matter of hanging out with few. It would be really easy to be perceived as a slut just because you went out with the wrong boy, and it would ruin forevermore. And of course, only loose girls slept with any boy, and it was really quaint now, if you think about what the 50s is presented as. So that was a bad book, Greg. You would not have liked it, I don't think. But sometimes I include really bad books, so because they give us the most to talk about, because everybody comes in, oh, what? What did you do and why? So yeah, that is true.
I think all of these, maybe not all, but these have been award-winning books.
Yes. Yeah, most of them have been. Yeah. And, they've got that activist bent to them because that's what this class is about, kind of. Yeah. Yeah, other thoughts about it?
I really noticed now that we've finished reading all of our novels, a theme in all of them that I really.
What is it?
Just activism and listening, like the counter narrative, and listening to these stories and of minorities and people that you don't usually hear from, people that I never usually would hear from, just because being white, some of the female roles that we listen to, Parvana Shirley, this one, what was
Petals are all.
yeah, that one. I related to, but not really personally, just because it was still a story of like immigration that I've never experienced. The only immigration I really know is like to the city. And it reminded me a lot of what I had my students read in 1301, Dreams and Nightmares, that book about immigration and how and a lot of my students resonated with it as well because they didn't know that there's this side of people that are just what it's like coming into a country and not knowing the language and fleeing something in persecution in their own country, and they're not just coming here to like take our jobs or use our resources. They're actually fleeing something, and that's what you see in this novel, and you see in all these other works that are kind of promoting this idea of activism. So I liked that.
Yeah, it definitely, that was the current that I caught as I was putting these books together. What, some other thoughts about Esperanza Rising?
So, can you hear me?
Yes.
So, the Spanish translations, I guess because I noticed the difference in the Revolution of Evelyn Serrano. For reading Esperanza Rising, I could get used to this one better.
Why do you think that is?
Maybe because it wasn't included in the same quotation marks.
Okay.
It was just a little bit easier for me to read. And on top of that, this story resonated a little bit better, a little bit more with me. Not only because my family is Mexican, but the story of her family coming from money and having a lot of land is kind of ingrained in my dad's past, where his family had a lot of land with a mountain on it, and they raised horses and cattle, and then it all separated, and then they became poor. So the story that was ingrained in her backstory is kind of ingrained in my past. So it was really kind of nostalgic reading the story in her young eyes, and to see her kind of come out of that.
Greg, what? I know you shared your opinion, but do you have any other insights on the novel for us?
Yes, ma'am. Aside from just the fact that you assigned it and I loved it just because of that alone, I really liked the just, I guess, picturing I never really would have thought of, I guess, putting it together in the manner that she did, where she took it from I guess that's what I found interesting, was taking it from someone of money or position over in Mexico, and then bringing them into showing the racism that, someone who really wasn't exposed to racism before, and bringing them down to the level, of someone who had education and so on and so forth, where they were, and bringing them into the United States where they're now, even though they don't have money, even though they had education and position and title, and where they came from, they had nothing and were thought upon as nothing, just simply because of their race. And so that part appealed to me as I read it, and I guess it interests me from that perspective.
Mm-hmm. Jennifer, what did you think?
Sorry, I was actually just researching. For whatever reason, like, it reminded me of, I was really hooked on the American Girl stories when I was younger.
Yep.
And Meet Josephina was like one of my favorites. And for whatever, while he was speaking, it reminded me of that. And I was trying to look up, because I was wondering what your thoughts were about those in terms of like a counter narrative. But I was just looking up the author of that. And I was amazed to find out she is very, very, very white. And I've honestly never thought about that, because like the American Girl collection doesn't really, at least to my memory, I don't know, it doesn't really, it's just got the American Girl collection, so it doesn't really say the authors, at least to my memory, on the front. And anyways, it just reminded me of that in terms of just a young girl and that perspective, and you sort of have the coming of age story in general in tandem with all those kinds of obstacles that not everybody has to face. But I don't know, it just reminded me so much of, I just made a lot of other connections. Like my son always, he watches a show called Spirit. And it's really similar in that, that moving and sort of uprooting everything. But anyway, so just making connections to other things. But yeah, I was really surprised. I actually just looked that up, and not what I imagined. And so I wonder how that affects the storytelling for the American Girls and things like that, because I always consider that to be a really cool entry into the minds of, other backgrounds and things like that as a kid. And I never once, my entire time ever reading the American Girl collection, looked up the authors until right now. And I was,
Yeah, that's always been problematic as to who's writing the narratives. And in addition to that, what is an American Girl? I don't know if it conveys. I have read a few of them, but they just didn't interest me as an adult.
Right. Yeah.
And I don't know why, because some adolescent novels do very much interest me as an adult. Usually it's because of there are contradictions, there are tensions, there are unsolved problems. Those are the kinds that
was really
I look for, the rich text.
Because
the metaphors on Esperanza Rising were kind of, and maybe it's because I've read it about 6 times, about starting over, about ripping out those that yarn and starting over, and you have your hills and your valleys, and mountaintops and your valleys in this kind of project that she's working on, and then it takes practice, and we do have our ups and downs, and it takes practice to get life right, and we just don't sometimes, and that to pass on the tradition that she is. With the American Girl series, I don't know if anybody's written about it, and I would think that it's ripe, but one also has to be able to make themselves read the entire group, and I don't know how many are in it, but it's a really highly capitalistic venture, because they've got the American Girl stores with American Girl dolls that are incredibly expensive, that they have the American Girl experience where they can do, I think they can do brunches and lunches and everything else at these stores. Does anybody know anything about the, yes, Katie?
So when I had my daughter, when I was little, we could never afford American Girl. I always wanted Samantha, and we could never afford her.
She was the popular one.
She was beautiful, and she was a brunette, which was a big deal because Barbie's usually blonde, right? So we could never afford her. So when I had my daughter, that was one of the first things I looked forward to. So for her 2nd birthday, she got her Bitty Baby American Girl, and then for her 3rd birthday coming up, she gets to go pick out her Welling, what are they called? Welly Wishers or something, which is the next doll. But you get to take them to the cafe, and they have high chairs for your baby dolls, and
Megan's going,
for your baby dolls, and they have hair clips and they have spa days for your babies where you can bring them in and they can redo their hair, and it's very fancy.
When I was little, I got a doll that was like an American Girl doll, but it wasn't an American Girl doll. I remember that. We went to the store for accessories and all that kind of stuff, and we had lunch, and there was an actual connected to the table high chair for my doll, and there was a hospital wing for the dolls that had not so nice owners that came in with the Einstein looking matted up hair that came out looking like an American Girl doll.
Hey, as a company, so my sister-in-law, a tornado hit her house. A tornado hit her house, and her daughters, all of her American Girl dolls were either destroyed in the tornado or were covered in glass and things from the impact of the tornado breaking the windows and things. And American Girl replaced every single doll and gave her all new clothes and everything, because she just wrote the company, is it possible to have these fixed or whatever? And they just sent her all new for free. So that's kind of cool.
Oh, that is very cool.
Talk about customer service.
Customer service, for sure. Yeah. They can afford to do that because they charge a lot for all of those different things. Yes. Hi there, Shay. Do you have your baby?
Aww.
The guys are kind of going, How are you feeling, Shay?
I'm doing okay. Mostly just tired at this point, but we're doing good.
I wonder why. Yeah, I wonder why. Yeah. And how's Remington?
He's perfect. We just got back from an appointment with a lactation consultant to make sure he's getting enough to eat, and he's doing great.
That's good.
Excellent.
Congratulations.
And he's sleeping and stuff?
Yes, he does well.
Good. Good.
That's great.
Good. Good. Well, welcome to the world, Remington. Yeah, so, I mean, but Hogwarts, you know, that, Harry Potter, that turned into an enormous capital
Franchise.
adventure at franchise, yeah. And so many things do now. In fact, it's the experience that surrounds it that seems to be more important than anything else. Yeah, I don't know how they cover that. What they're showing that is an American girl can be come from different ethnic and racial backgrounds. I know that they do that, right?
And it's economic too. Like it's I think there's like social backgrounds, ethnic backgrounds. I think they kind of cover.
Oh, so they feature little girls who wouldn't be able to buy the books?
I know.
I'm kidding. I am kidding. I'm
Um,
too cynical for my own good. What kind of backgrounds? Like socioeconomic?
I'm trying to remember. There was one. I think her name was ironically like Penny or something, if I remember right. This is like forever.
Oh gosh.
I know, Penelope. Yeah. And I did not get that away. I'm got it right now. But yeah, I haven't looked at this since I was a kid, but it stuck with me. And then religious too. So you had Kirsten, who was Jewish, like celebrated Hanukkah instead of Christmas and things like that. So,
Cool.
kind of covered their bases. But anyways, I don't know why they reminded me of it because I didn't think much of it, and I got, like I said, I really liked the series when I was younger. I loved Addie a lot; it was one of my favorites.
I think I did read Addie and Samantha.
Awesome, yeah. So Kirsten and Addie, whatever, were my favorites. But I really, really liked Josephine. I think really the first initial connection that I made was just like those sort of those Spanish phrases that were kind of peppered throughout. Happen in Esperanza Rising. I mean, they happen in Meet Josephina also, and I really liked that. And I remember when my niece was born, she was born in Chile, and so she's Chilean and really white on the other side. I remember I got those for her, and she, loved them because it was like, a little girl who looked like her and, spoke Spanish and things like that. And for the longest time, like, I had to learn Spanish to communicate with her because she only spoke Spanish. So now she's bilingual, but it was our little connection to talk about the books. Yeah. So, but anyway, yeah. So, but it just reminded me of that very just juvenile in a good way, you know what I mean? In just that sort of dealing with everything you're dealing with, both as an adolescent in general, like I said, in addition to other obstacles. And I don't know, my mind kind of immediately went to American Girl. And, I was interested because I know, like, I read a little bit about how the author of this one, like, based that on her grandmother's life or mother's life, I forget, in Esperanza Rising. So it was essentially a true narrative.
Her grandmother.
Grandmother,
yeah, it's her grandmother.
And that's what made me want to look up the author of American Girl. I'm like, interesting, like, I wonder where that came from. And yeah, Valerie Tripp is super white. So I don't know. I was like, oh my gosh. Well, there goes my whole theory. But anyway.
Well, that's always one of the questions.
Like, I'm kind of
who should be writing these narratives?
Yeah, exactly. Is in terms of experience, and I think, like, that's what Deborah Ellis was talking about in Parvana's journey was, like, she didn't necessarily experience those things. So it's like, is it giving a voice to the voiceless, or is it taking it? Because if you didn't experience it, do you have the authority to speak on that? And so it's just kind of going back to that question.
Mm-hmm. Or then not hearing it at all because somebody's not going to write that book. Anybody take any issue with Esperanza Rising? Yeah.
Not issue, but I had a feeling of dread the whole time. Like once the house burned down, I was like, oh my gosh, it's Grapes of Wrath all over again. Like when she was saying that she was saving up the money orders to send to Abuelita, I was like, Abuelita's dead. She's not coming back. When she was talking about we'll see each other after the mountains and valleys, that means the afterlife, honey.
That's funny.
We've jaded Alex.
Oh, yes, that's great.
I will say the first time I read it, I was terrified that her mother was gonna die. Like, and then she was just gonna be like a little orphan girl who worked super duper hard, but also had this like leech complex. Like, I don't belong here. Like, these people are just like, because she has that work where I want to do, like, I wanted to earn my way and keep my part, but at the same time, she's still a child, and like, she's taking care of her mom, and she's doing things that her mom would do, but like,
And she's really dislikable. Is that a word?
especially in the beginning.
At the beginning. Yeah, I just, she's just a horrible
She's a
little brat.
Yeah.
Well, and when you were talking about identity and subject, that kind of got me thinking too, because as her situation changed and she went from having everything and a dad to then now being thrust into a place she doesn't speak the language, she has to take care of her mother, and she's separated from her grandmother and is working hard to get them reunited again, and that shifted something in her.
Mhm.
And I don't know if it was how she viewed herself and her position, where she was in the family now. She kind of took on a role that maybe her dad would have played.
Mhm.
And
She definitely shifted.
Yeah.
As she assumed a different subject
Right.
position, very much so. Heart and soul.
She even said, I will be la patrona now.
Uh-huh.
I will be the head.
Yeah.
Family.
Yeah.
So do we think that she keeps that head of the family whenever her mom gets better and now that Abuelita is there, or does she regress?
I think it's three strong women working together. I can't help but to think that. With these generational voices.
I also wonder what's going to happen whenever she goes to school.
Yeah, that's going to be tough.
Because, Isabel's getting to go to school, and like Esperanza has this ridiculously awesome education, but she doesn't have the language, and I see that so often. Not like the excellent education part, but like smart kids coming in to my school, they don't have the language to do what they need to do, especially on that stupid STAR test.
Mhm.
Like, they've been in the country 2 years, and you expect them to pass a test that natives can't pass. Like, it's just frustrating.
Yeah, it's exceptionally frustrating. I think part of what bothered me is this, it always bothers me at the beginning of the novel, and then I forget it by the end. So it must resolve itself. But it's this notion of kind of a fatalism. What is it?
Like destiny?
And, well, and there's something to do with, for how long she clings to that capitalism, although it's not capitalism necessarily, but how long she clings to the class. Entitlement, the sense of entitlement and the class system. Because there's very clearly a class system with her
Miguel
family.
is on the other side.
Other side of the river.
I can't believe she told him that. Like, oh my god.
Poor brainless child.
And even after they were all living in the worst conditions, she's like getting ready to take a bath, and she's doing,
Yeah.
I'm ready.
Dress me. Or,
Yeah.
yeah.
She's still
Wash me. Yeah. Yeah.
She hadn't changed yet,
When
even
she,
though everything around her changed.
Uh-huh.
when she had that outburst, the second outburst with Miguel, and she said, don't you see you're still a peasant here? I am really surprised that he said, here I have the opportunity to raise myself up, instead of saying, you're a peasant too.
Tells you about his character.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think what bothered me is this notion of the American dream, that it still underscores the American dream and what it can mean, even though we've seen pretty consistently through a lot of novels how that American dream is just, it's just sliced in half and thrown away. Because when we talk about race and civil rights and that, and how what happens in those novels, well, isn't that they're not participating in the so-called American dream. because they can't because of their skin color. Or, man, and I learned so much reading adolescent novels like this. I didn't know about the, I didn't know that they sent back, it doesn't surprise me that, they'd send back even American citizens to Mexico. It's not sending them back, it's sending them to Mexico, even though they were American citizens or had their papers or whatever. I didn't know about that. I've known for a long time about Chavez, and they don't mention him in this at all, and it may be a different time period. But that Chavez was, he was protesting the situation of the farm workers and migrant farm workers, and I assume it isn't in that same time period because it doesn't bring him up, and that would be an important figure to bring up in terms of what's her name, the real activist.
Martha.
Martha, yeah, Martha. How she was responding. Yeah, and then I didn't know anything about the Puerto Rican background about the young lords. Nothing. I'd never heard anything about that. How does this happen? Well, it happens because, nobody's telling those narratives. I've known about the civil rights movement from beginning to end for a long time. I watched it on television, and then everything that came after it. Okay, so we got Esperanza Rising, we've got Evelyn. Oh, yeah. One Crazy Summer, I had that, I knew that, the material in that. Except I didn't initially know about what the Black Panthers did.
We thought we knew.
We thought we knew, but it was one of those narratives that had been corrupted and taken advantage of to perpetuate certain stereotypes about the Black Panthers. So Dear Martin, Pravana's Journey, I knew something of that, but not to the extent. It gave me a lot more history on landscape, environment of Afghanistan, and what it might be like. So I learned a lot from these novels that we read. A great deal that I never would pick up in the history book, that's for sure.
Right.
Unless I were specializing in something like that.
Even pick up through culture.
Yeah.
That's the real
And then, I don't know if anybody has written on Trail of Tears or any kind of, I know that Bruchac has written quite a bit on American Indians, but I don't know if anybody's written on the Trail of Tears and the tragedy that brought forth. Okay, well, so pretty successful group of books then this semester, you think? Kind of varied.
Varied, but still with common themes and, a lot of
Oh yeah,
patterns.
yeah, there are a lot of patterns. All right, this is what I mean by, so some of these will show that I haven't read them, but I have. It's just that when I read them, I do this, and it doesn't show me as reading it. So let's see what Jill had to say. Blindfolds and Bitter Pills, good title. Quote, the more I learn, the more I realize how much I don't know. Albert Einstein may have been making a scientific reference with his observation, yet the same sentiment applies to history and the extent the often ugly truth has been removed from our history books and collective conscience. It is staggering to consider the depth of deceit revealed in each piece of history brought to light. And that's really true. What we know now, most of the population doesn't know, just from this one little smattering. The importance of addressing the past in order to improve the future cannot be overstated, yet administering the bitter pill of our past and current racist and oppressive policies and attitudes is difficult. To address this task, historical fiction can be a surreptitious vehicle, or sometimes not so surreptitious, vehicle in which to deliver topics of United States history that are invisible in traditional nationalist discourse and history lessons. In Esperanza Rising, for instance, the Mexican Repatriation Act and its repercussions impact not only the fictional storyline, but the author's own family, a chapter of U.S. immigration policy rarely discussed in history class or in national debate, yet it has grossly affected over 500,000 people in the United States and Mexico. One Crazy Summer and The Rock and the River are narratives embedded in the Black Panther breakfast and children's programs. Rarely are these community programs included in discussions of their revolutionary movement. That today's free breakfast programs in public schools began with a Black Panther ideology would be counterintuitive to the whitewashed rhetoric presented in public school curricula, as well as the violent reputation imposed upon the Black Panther movement. Whether it is racist government policies, propaganda used to smear a resistance movement, or an overt nod to nationalism, historical fiction can be used to remove the blindfold, and there's your blindfold, the title, so aptly draped across the public eye, buffering the bitterness of reality with relatable characters and empathetic storylines. Yeah, definitely. I mean, that pretty much covers what we've done this semester. It's about revealing the dark and ugly underside of the American dream and American history. We only got a start on it. And Allie says, hers is Transporting to Transform. Nice on the title. Most of the novels we have read throughout this semester deal in large part with the protagonist coming to terms with their identity and subsequently harnessing their own agency. In a handful of these novels, for the self-discovery to happen, the protagonist must physically leave one location. Yes, and that's true with a lot of novels, that there's this, like Watson's Go to Birmingham. That's going from Flint, Michigan to Birmingham, that trip across the country, whether of their own volition or through force in order to transform. The movement allows for both a literal and metaphorical perspective shift. Yes, very much so. From a fresh angle, the characters are able to fully understand anything from their own identity to a well-rounded view of something as misunderstood as the Black Panthers. In One Crazy Summer, Delphine must leave her life in New York and the protection of her grandmother in order to gain a new perspective on womanhood, activism, her mother, and herself. Delphine leaves an echo chamber of sorts, allowing for more than one voice to influence her. For Esperanza and Esperanza Rising, her transportation vastly differs from Delphine's. After a slew of injustices, Esperanza finds herself not only transported to a completely different land, but to a completely different lifestyle. She is forced out of her monetary, cultural, and familial comforts to a land where her very existence is deemed less than. However, because of this shift in location, Esperanza has a shift in perspective, specifically her perspective on class. Similarly, in Pravana's journey, Pravana is forced to leave her own comforts. Like Esperanza, she faces hardships along her route, yet it allows her to transform. All of these literal changes in location lead the protagonist to leave their mental locations and establish their sense of self and their sense of agency. We have read from various perspectives this semester, leaving the comforts, I like that, leaving the comforts of our own subject positions in order to transport ourselves into the lives of these protagonists. It is because of this reading that we too may transform ourselves. These are really good. Everything I read on here has been really, really good. Okay, Kinsley. The Great Divide. Young adult novels, such as the ones we have been reading this semester, are useful for introducing topics, both common and controversial, to adolescent readers. Among these are issues dealing with both race and class and how society and individuals handle these differences. In Esperanza Rising and the absolutely true story of a part-time Indian, the protagonist is abruptly introduced to the divide that lies between classes and races. For Esperanza, this comes with the realization that her way of life has become what she once thought to be beneath her as part of the struggling working class. For Junior, the reality hits when he attends a wealthier school filled with mostly white students. He attempts to hide the marks of his poverty and his connection to his people. Both of these novels deal with the divide between poverty and wealth that is integrated into society. Yeah, class has really been a pretty major part of a lot of the novels that we've read. By introducing these concepts to each individual protagonist, the authors of these novels are also introducing these ideas to their young readers, regardless of if they were previously aware of this divide. Does introduction to these topics serve as an educational and eye-opening experience, or create that's a good question, or create a pessimistic idea of the world to a young reader? What do you think?
Just like everything else.
Depends. Dang it, she's using my words against me.
As well as in the wonderful shade of gray.
Yeah.
So
I would argue that the world is not a happy place for readers to be exposed to these realities, especially in such authentic examples as are provided here in these stories, can only prepare adolescents to the situations that they or those close to them might face. Neither of these novels propose a resolution to this divide. Is this something young adult authors should strive for? In my opinion, if a solution were as simple as that, we would not be writing fiction about topics such as these. It is the job of authors to educate and entertain by authenticity. With any luck, preparing young students for reality by sharing stories like this will push them to be passionate about these topics and learn to recognize the injustices that the world is full of. Mitigating migration in the mind and setting. Catchy titles. When looking for potential topics within the novels we have addressed this semester, I couldn't help but notice the element of migration strung throughout most, if not all, of the text. While Deborah Ellis's Parvana's Journey and Pam Munoz-Ryan's Esperanza Rising deal with a literal sense of migrating from one geographic location to another, these two novels, as well as Nick Stone's Dear Martin, also deal with migration in a more figurative way. The characters of these novels are trying to navigate from an old life to a new one, and the effects that mental journey has on their psyche is detrimental to their progress and survival in an entirely new world. Parvana and Esperanza must deal with the death of their fathers. Got a lot of dead fathers, don't we? Or completely absent fathers. An unknown and distressing voyage to a new land in an attempt to escape oppression and or death. In Dear Martin, Justice struggles to adjust to a life as one of the only African-American students in an elite prep school. Even as he visits his mother, battles PTSD from his experiences with police brutality, and journals to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Justice struggles with who he truly is as he analyzes his past life in the ghetto with his mother and his new life in the dorms surrounded by seemingly ignorant white students. Each of these characters must physically navigate through war, racism, and trauma, all the while migrating from a life they knew and were comfortable in, at least for the most part, to an unknown and unforeseen future full of various obstacles based on resistance they have encountered. Their need to mitigate through the fear, insecurities, and loneliness of their mind, all the while migrating physically and geographically, lends itself to intense and meaningful storylines. Yeah, we've got literal and literal, physical, and symbolic, metaphorical journeys. But that makes sense because that's what adolescence is in the first place. It's a journey from childhood to where they are to adulthood. And it's a pretty strange place that they have to, pretty strange places that they have to move through to get to that adulthood. And don't think it gets that much better when you get older. Maybe it does.
So I don't want to jump on Greg's bandwagon of ego stroking, but I do. Or maybe I do if it's working. I don't know. But I do want to say thank you for choosing Dear Martin because I hadn't read that book. And I teach a thematic unit on discrimination to my sophomores. And we're in an area where I was warned about teaching racial issues because there's I guess, a lot of like racial tension in our school, which my reply was, well, then they need to hear it more. So I ended up using a couple chapters of Dear Martin as like an inspiration piece for my classes. And these are kids that like don't read. They're low level, low performing students. And I had kids in every single class ask if they could text their parents to order the book. So pretty awesome. So thank you.
Bravo. I love that. I am so happy to hear that.
Awesome. Like,
yeah, I guess this is how we make a difference, right?
Yeah, it was great. So thank you for choosing that.
Oh, I promise, it's my pleasure. Yeah. Okay, the doom of the leading ladies. Dum, dum, dum. This is Jamisa. M.T. Anderson's Feed and Rita William Garcia's One Crazy Summer are two of the novels that we have read this semester that have managed to use science fiction and dystopic themes to demonstrate a different world viewpoints regarding resistance to the novel's main society. By main society, I'm referring to the present system in each story that pushes back against Violet from Feed and Cecile from One Crazy Summer. The resistance to the main society takes form in Feed through Violet's intentional abstinence from purchasing many items from the feed. Do you ever guys, when you're visiting Amazon and you get, or you're on your Facebook and you've just been on Amazon, and I mean, before you could even get to Facebook, there's an ad from Amazon that do you think of Feed at that point? And what happens if I resist? Purchasing many items from the feed before she realizes that the feed system is monitoring her every move to determine whether she is worth keeping alive or not. If you're not a good consumer, you're not worth it. Violet aims to counteract the system in place that demands that she buys and consumes during a time of increased frequency of health issues, such as lesions and other unnatural phenomena. Violet also loses her relationship with the main protagonist, Titus, by the end of the novel. In One Crazy Summer, Cecile likewise aims to change her world by contributing to the Black Panther Party and living separately from her three daughters. While doing so, she subverts the expectation that every woman is a motherly caretaker by forgetting her daughter's existence at times, forces them away from the kitchen, and doesn't use their given birth names. Oh, Cecile. Cecile's of course she didn't use her own either. Cecile's main reason for acting that way that she does from the loss of her own mother when she was 11 years old. But just as Violet's actions catch up with her, Cecile's disregard for her daughters catches up with Cecile by contributing to the strained relationship that continues to exist by the end of the novel. I'd sure like to know how the three end up, where it progresses, and that will be one of my goals, to get that read at some point or soon. The doom of living as a resistance to the main society of each novel contributes to the theme of resistance and revolution by implying that in resistance and revolution, no companionship and support may exist. Ooh, that is dark. But then we and sometimes that's what these novels are, is about the struggle to create and maintain relationships under impossible circumstances. Yeah, and change those relationships. Daisy, I believe that children are our future. El poder de la resistencia. No, I can't read Spanish. Con la juventud, or the power of resistance begins with youth, is understandably a theme we find throughout the young adult novels we have read and examined in this course. It is apparent that the ability to resist societal norms, especially those which are founded upon whiteness and racism, must begin with the younger generation. It is within the youth of novels that change begins. This is because children, unlike adults, often have pure motives and a belief that true change may occur. However, it is also apparent that the children and young adults in novels are far more powerful and effective at inciting true change than the adults. The apathy and lack of action by adults has left the younger generation with little choice. Many national movements have prominent adult figures recognized as leaders of change, but the youth of these movements were and are powerful. And that's right, because the work that Martin Luther King did, he wouldn't have been able to accomplish what he did without the youth being the main participants. They were the ones who could leave school and march while their teachers turned their backs intentionally so that they could just walk away. And parents couldn't do much because they had to earn, they're the breadwinners. And if they got fired, their situation turns completely hopeless. Getting arrested as a youth is very different than getting arrested as an adult, especially for Black adults. Additionally, there it is. Additionally, the leaders of these movements did not fail to recognize the importance of ensuring that the youth in this country were taken care of. One example is the Children's Breakfast Program created by the Black Panthers. In the beginning, we looked at Planet of Junior Brown and saw how Junior and Buddy resisted the system while Junior's mother, Janella, tried to ensure her family embodied the white norm. The power and courage to resist did not emerge within adults, but instead inside the children who were tired of giving up their agency to a hopeless binary they were never going to win. In Pravana's journey, it was the children that forged a path and highlighted the existence of inadequate adults. In The Rock and the River, Sam and Stick, while initially walking different paths, both embodied resistance and ended up joining the Black Panthers in an effort to bring change. In Esperanza Rising, we learn about perseverance. Abuelita emphasizes that one can never fear the necessary task of starting over, ripping out those threads. Failure is not the end, but instead a learning experience that teaches one how to succeed the next time around. Makes me think of Dweck's growth mindset. What's that?
So Carol Dweck is one of the leading researchers on growth mindset, and so it's a binary term. So you either have a growth mindset or you have a fixed mindset. Fixed mindset says I'm smart. Growth mindset says I have a good work ethic. Like, I may not be smart, but I work really hard, and so I will get to the A because I worked hard.
Mm-hmm.
Like, even though I'm not there yet, that doesn't mean I won't ever be there. I will be there eventually.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's about changing, like, getting out of the I'm either smart or I'm dumb mindset and getting into, even though I can't do it, it's not that I can't do it ever. I can't do it yet. And like, so that if you fail, you don't give up because that's who you are. You say, oh, okay, like it's how you view things. Like, I failed, but it's because I'm on the way to succeeding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm preparing for success.
Right.
My failure prepares me for success.
It's really big in education right now. Like, there's a TED Talk on it in the whole 9 yards.
Okay. Interesting.
Could I add
It is
something
within
on
the
that?
spirit of youth. I'm sorry, what?
If I could add something on it real quick, because it goes back to the idea
Please
of
do.
creativity. The growth mindset is actually like the marketing term to make it easier to digest. It was actually originally entity theory versus incremental theory. So entity
What
is
was the first one?
Entity theory.
Okay.
So it's like the idea of identity. It's I
Yeah.
am this thing, this essence of who I am, versus incremental as I'm affected by the things around me and I can affect those things.
Oh, cool.
Back to
That
our
is
initial conversation.
exactly like subject and identity, the difference between. Yeah. Cool. I like that connection. It is within the spirit of youth and the youth that find the strength and perseverance to continue to start repeatedly that resistance finds its power. The youth of today are forced to use their own voices to change their situations. However, it is more than just necessity. It is almost as if many adults do not realize they are living in the upside down, where issues such as oppression and racism flow like a, this is pretty, and dark, flow like a dark fog that permeates everything. The children have hope for the future. Question? We have discussed the idea of the child savior in class as a result of inadequate adults. Is there more to young resistors than necessity? Why is resistance in young adults so powerful? Childhood, in terms of resistance, is a state of being or a mindset that adults should aspire to. To be childlike, a person would embody traits of humility, innocence, selflessness, and a desire for something more that is beyond everyday life. I can't wait to hear you talk about that. Home, bittersweet home. Another great topic. Title: The notion of home is where the heart is complicated when one's heart beats for revolution. The semester's readings have imparted a variety of homes, from Cecile's stucco home that lacks warmth, to Buddy's hideout home, to Sam's cozy home. Several of the novels we have read this semester have presented the home as a safe haven, riddled with the turmoil that revolution brings. This is especially evident in both The Rock and the River and the Revolution of Evelyn Serrano. Each novel presents safe homes occupied by loving, supportive families, yet these safe havens are not conducive to the adolescent's thirst for revolution. So that comfort makes one perhaps a bit on the apathetic side. Because you don't want, why? I'm comfortable. Why should I do anything?
Don't fix it if it ain't broke.
Exactly. And I'm kind of one of those proponents.
Right.
Except we just don't always know that it's not broken, right? In The Rock and the River, Stick must leave his home to pursue his calling for resistance. Evelyn also pushes against the comfort of her home to follow a fight she believes to be right. Home in each of these novels exists as a paradoxical locus of support and resistance. Home and the revolution. Yeah, that would be a super interesting topic to pursue. Querida Abuela, the mother of remembrance. Throughout the readings this semester, we have encountered the theme of motherhood, and within it, a diverse range of mothering, from overbearing to absentee and to loving. For this paper, I would examine motherhood as seen in the grandmother figure, especially the abuela figures of the revolution of Evelyn Serrano and Esperanza Rising. My topic would explore the relationship between abuela and granddaughter, and how the abuela is both influence and cultural memory for the grandchild. Evelyn's abuela from Evelyn Revolution and Esperanza's abuelita are grandmothers of history, culture, and remembrance. Evelyn's abuela provides a lesson in their Puerto Rican familial history, a history Evelyn would have otherwise never known if not for this presence. It is when abuela speaks of her past in Puerto Rico, of the country's history through its depression, she explains the nationalist fight for independence. Did you know anything about that nationalist fight for independence?
No idea.
Yeah, I didn't either. Through her teachings, Evelyn becomes enlightened and inspired to start a revolution in her heart, this very same way Abuela did in her own. Her abuela opens a door Evelyn never knew existed. After migrating from Mexico to the U.S., Esperanza sees her mother's health decline, realizing it was clear her mama needed abuelita. When abuelita is finally reunited, Esperanza sees a positive change in her mama's health, simply by the presence of this mother. I would argue that abuelita is more than a motherly presence. She is a physical embodiment of the country left behind. Abuelita's return brings memory of home, culture, and history. Abuelita's teaching of the zigzag pattern in an unfinished blanket filled with mountains and valleys becomes inspiration for Esperanza to apply those lessons in life. Abuelita's unfinished blanket, in which she includes her own strand of hair to entwine forever her love and good wishes, is imagery present from start to end of the novel. And that's really true. I mean, she was consistent with offering some pretty rich metaphors throughout it. Esperanza finally taking over the blanket to finish as her own, including her hair, her heritage. Oh, that's awesome. Displaying Abuela's lessons mattered greatly. My personal experience with my own abuela taught me a history of a culture I would have otherwise never known quite as deeply. Abuelas are a window to the past that influences our present. As the aforementioned novels depict, the abuela figure is teacher of culture, a reminder of history, and a mother to all. Notice we don't have many grandfathers hanging out.
Or fathers.
Or fathers.
And we flower the grandfathers around.
Oh, that, yeah.
I'm listening to that.
How is that? Weed flower.
It's okay. Like I'm listening to it. I think there are 5 different parts, and so I'm about halfway through the second part. So they just came and took the grandfather and the uncle to the internment camp. They just arrested them. The FBI came for them, and so the rest of the family's trying to figure out: do we stay? Do we go? What do we do? And so it's interesting. It's sad. It makes me really, really angry. All the things, but I knew it would. So
yeah. That anger is supposed to inspire us to do something, I'm pretty sure, or to make sure it doesn't happen again, which it does.
Right.
Not to be cynical.
Right.
How is it a cynic teaches children lit? Please tell me. All right, so now we can go to folks. Andrea, tell us.
So, in all of our novels, I can't think of one that doesn't do it. I'm not necessarily saying that the parents step out and the community step in, but where a community lacks something, an organization or a community member or community members to fill in that hole, and that's what our novels are telling us. That there is someone out there, there's something, organization out there that's going to help, or that they're there to fill in that gap, or that they have been there in the past. Maybe they're not there now, and that's what I noticed throughout all of our readings. That there's hope, that there's a group of people that can help if someone's struggling.
That's a good observation. And that's where hope comes from, the knowledge that they're not alone in their resistance. I don't know if it's different for adult novels or not. Do the novels of resistance of young adults, do they have to have characters that fight in pairs, or have an outside institution that will help them accomplish something or not? Yeah, that's a good question. Let's see, Megan. All happiness for a price, the consequences that result from resisting. Have at it.
Well, I guess it's the pessimist in me. I just can't get my mind off of the things that happen to the people that resist. So we see the heroes of our story. We see Esperanza, and I think the 2 that I mentioned were Feed and Rock in the River. We see them get up to this high point in their resistance, where they are going to get away with it. Bucky just got released from prison. They're taking him home in the Rock in the River, and Violet is living this life that she is not connected. And then the hammer falls, the other shoe drops. Reality happens, and Stick gets killed and Violet dies. And I don't know why this is so fascinating to me, but I love the realism of it, I guess, because in anything that we do, as I mentioned in this, change is vital. Change is vital. Nothing good happens without change in our world. But if you notice, even in the historical examples, other than the works that I've listed here, you see that those who make the biggest change have the most tragic downfall. They have the most the worst backstory ever when you think about it, when they get up to that point where they want to make that change. And then after they work almost, it could be their entire lives, it could be for a few months, however long it takes for them to start the ball rolling on that change and get something productive out of it, then by that time the change happens, they have paid the consequences for it, and they're probably dead. They're in jail. Somebody they love is dead. Something happens that just brings everybody from cloud 9 back to where they started at the beginning of the story.
This is an interesting juxtaposition because Andrea was talking about the hope of somebody being there to help, and you're seeing a different side of that. That's an interesting contradiction, really, when you think about what's going on here. Andrea, are you a optimistic person?
Sorry, I've got a crying baby. What was that?
Are you an optimistic person?
I try to be, but lately it's been difficult.
Yeah.
But
And
I try to
Megan?
be.
I try to be optimistic, but my first thought is that I go down the pessimistic road. I'm like, oh, this is gonna happen. Okay.
Yeah, I instinctually go like I'm gonna be optimistic, and then when things turn around, then I'll turn it around too.
And so this might be a result of individual dispositions, personalities, and the approach. Yeah, I'm always waiting, especially in young adult literature, because death and sex are the two defining characteristics of it. So I anticipate death and sex in a young adult novel. Period. Now, when we're talking about adolescent, it's a little bit different as to how close they get to those two things. But yeah, so I like that contrast. Greg.
Yes, ma'am.
Resisting motherly reverse racism. Have at it.
So I felt it was just a couple of the books that we read there with and I started to touch on it the last time we were talking, but we're like in Dear Martin, how you've got Justice struggling to stay in line with Martin Luther King's philosophy there of nonviolence, and his mom wanting that, wanting good things for him, but sending him to go to school with a white culture and to better himself and whatnot. But yet she, even though she has that and all that going for him, then she, I think, reverse racisms on him to where she finds that it's not appropriate for him to date a white girl. And then I thought that the same thing happened there in The Planet of Junior Brown. You remember how Junior was, his mother wanted him to stay safe and stay white, and not really associate himself with black society. And so I thought that she did some reverse racism on that piece of it. And then what was it with the so I said about Sam struggles with that and the rock and the river. So I just thought that throughout the semester, one of the main things that we dealt with was the racism that we dealt with inside of these novels. The main characters are dealing with that racism, but then they also show that not only do they have the struggle with the racism that is prevalent throughout, the novels themselves, but the characters, the little sub characters in there, they're having to deal with a little bit of struggle between, like these characters, the African American characters, are dealing with the racism regarding the whites, but also a little bit of racism regarding their parents or somebody close to them in regards to black society as well. So I thought that was an interesting topic to look at.
I'd say it's pretty common. I'm guessing. I can't make a a final determination because I haven't read enough novels with people of color and how it works with dating white people or being around white people. Because with Rock in the River, is that the one? No. Justice, dear Martin, with how the white kids act and just their ignorance and blindness interacting with white. There's something there to look at for sure. Those interactions, whether it be a parent or whether it be something else, you know, friends. Something definitely to look at.
It's kind of heater man in here today.
Do what?
It's so cold in here today.
Is it? I love this title. This might be the best title. I don't know. My heroes have always been oppressors. Hegelian dialectic with animal
Parallels.
Oh, parallels. Okay, there's more to it. Okay. Have at it.
Okay.
My heroes have always been oppressors.
We had to have a little bit of Willie Nelson in there, right? So really this is the animals that we see in these novels, or animal references that we'll see in the novels, that honestly we overlook them most times. They're essentially invisible. But what I started to notice as I was looking at them is they parallel the protagonists a lot of times, or one of the main characters that's there. So I saw the rats. Does anybody remember the rats in Junior Brown? No. Okay. Barely. Well, because it's a very short scene right at the very beginning. They're sitting on the Hudson River, and there are 3 rats. One starts to approach Junior and Buddy, and Buddy throws a rock at it. One just barely misses it, and Junior thinks it's funny, and because the rat is hungry and is not going to stop until Buddy actually hits him straight on, which causes the rat to go down into the hole. And then they notice 2 others that are sitting there beside or in kind of a hole at the riverbank. So they're going to be left alone. And that's essentially what the solution to the oppression that Buddy and the others are facing is to hide away in a hole and not bother the system. But the problem is then that makes Junior and Buddy oppressors. They're the ones who are oppressing then these other creatures, that as long as you can see something as less than you, it's okay to treat it however you want. And we see that also in, I saw it in a lot of them, but I mentioned feed because I thought that was the strangest one. The non-farms. You have this meat. It's essentially the animals that are not allowed to fully form to become what they're supposed to be, raised on blood in these large farms. That's what Violet essentially becomes at the end. She becomes this filet mignon that Titus is allowed to feed on emotionally.
Oh man, ouch! Yeah.
Yeah. And I saw it in most of them. There are these same types of things. That this is when you have the thesis of oppression, and then the antithesis of these resistors coming in. That the synthesis then is just actually more oppression. They become oppressors because they've been acculturated to that.
Oh wow.
Sorry, not to be.
No, it's perfect. It's twisted. It's my favorite.
I have a question for you, Jeremy. I'm not sure if you've thought about it. I'm not sure if anyone's thought about it, but can you have a novel? Can you have a situation where there is no oppressor? There are no oppressors. There has to be someone in power, and there has to be someone underneath you.
Well, there wouldn't be much of a story, would there?
True, but even in a classroom, there's always someone in power, or even in your friends group. That's like, there's not a story, yeah, but if we had a perfect world, is there such a situation where there's no someone on top? Not
I
sure.
would think,
Just a question. Not sure you thought about it, but I've thought about it. And in when I read your post, it made me think about it as well. Because there is like the child becomes the oppressor as well. And because of that, and it made me think of that.
yeah, I thought about that kind of thing too, where you have the child becoming the oppressor, but I think you can have a power dynamic without oppression, but everybody has to agree to it. So like the kittens in Esperanza Rising, you have the kittens there. They're held up as this symbol of how bad the workers have it. But then the workers take the kittens and take care of them. They make them parts of their families. Essentially, the kittens become servants. So the power dynamic is still there, but are they necessarily being oppressed? Would be the question in that sense. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. Just a thought.
And okay, there are three. I don't know what this is from, but humans against humans, humans against nature, or nature against humans, and humans against self.
Types of conflict. Right?
So what is it?
Types of conflict.
Types of conflict. Thank you. I should know that, shouldn't I?
You also have man versus society, right?
Man versus nature.
Yes. Yes. So there are four kinds of conflict. So it seems like your oppressors, you can kind of look at, nature can be an oppressor. And certainly society, different institutions in society can be oppressive.
Man versus man, man versus self. Those are the last two.
Yeah, the human versus self. We know that human versus human, there can be oppressors easily. I wonder if the humans versus self, if the oppressor is less likely to occur in that particular conflict.
It's like you have addiction? Split personality.
Exactly. What'd you say, yeah?
Addiction.
Addiction. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
I wonder. Something to think about. Could be a dissertation. Just saying. Oh, what was I doing? I know. Okay, so next. Katie. Parenting by the Parentless. Excellent title.
Thank you. So I just saw so many similarities between Parvana and Esperanza, which I'm sure we all did. Particularly in that Parvana seemed to kind of collect children as she went. I know that sounds weird, but she
does.
Lots of their names, but the two that she kind of parents as she is on her journey, and then with Esperanza, with the two babies that she's in charge of, as well as Isabella. She is kind of put in this place where she's having to play a role that they're playing this role that they're both kind of mourning the loss of, particularly when Esperanza's mother is sick. He is hoping for that mother figure, and with Parvana, she's searching for her mother. And they are both having to play that role, which I just thought was an interesting kind of opting for their mom. They're having to be, a mother figure to other children.
I wonder how father figures play into that.
Well, they both girls are there for their father's death, right? So, or not.
Yes.
But, well, I guess does Parvana witness her father's death? I know she buries him.
Not in the book. Not in this novel. She does in the first one, The Breadwinner.
So they're also missing that role too. So that's interesting that they're having to play that parenting role when they don't have an active example, at least. And I know that that Esperanza has her mother living, but she's just not with her at that time. She's having to, comfort and care for children while she wants to be comforted and cared for.
Do you think they take on traditional parenting roles, or do they change those parenting roles?
Both. I think that if we describe parents in terms of like A, B, and C, we would say they feed and change and care for and, kiss boo-boos or whatever, and they do those things. But they also have to, they aren't necessarily given the tools that they need to do that. So it kind of changes based on necessity. I think especially with Carvana, the ways in which she is forced to care for those kids is very different than you would see in a traditional family, right? Like she's having to have them, suck water out of a cloth, or eat pages of a book, or whatever, for them to sustain living, which we hope is not the traditional family, picture of family. But at the same time, I guess that's probably coming from a middle class white woman who, has those opportunities to feed her child and buy her American Girl dolls. So, I think that's a hard question.
I think that your observation leads to further questions that could definitely be a fuller topic, a paper topic, an article topic. Jennifer, landscapes and literature. So tell us about yours. Is that right? Did I get the right person?
Yeah.
Yes.
So mine kind of started out, I was kind of considering like the types of conflict and things like that. And then I got intrigued by considering, Parvana Journey is probably my favorite one that I've read this time. So I wanted to include that. And what really sticks with me about that particular one is sort of the primary struggles that she experiences just in terms of survival, just like shelter, safety, food, that kind of thing. But then I was thinking of the other struggles that the other books deal with, which a lot of them deal with class or race and things like that, which would be secondary in terms of survival, but both necessary to overcome in order to take part. And so, but then I was looking at setting and how that played a role. So I felt like physically in Parvana's journey, she was wandering the desert, she was in the elements, and was affected externally by all of these things, and the bombing and all just the physical destruction, and sort of how that mirrored her primary struggles like safety, food, etc. And then kind of looking at, I kind of just randomly picked one of the books really that dealt with, because there were several that dealt with racism, which is, and how setting there was, in a city, things like that. So in the Rock and the River, it was in Chicago. And I wanted to do something with the idea that in a very man-made setting, you have a very man-made struggle, like a social constructed issue of racism.
Like Parvana, or like Junior Brown, maybe?
Exactly. And I thought that would have been really fun too. And then one of the other novels I really liked was Fade. And so I basically, in my post, I was talking about how you have this one they're physically in the elements, which is Parvana. Then you have one in nature. So you have these natural issues, of hunger and things like that. Like physiologically, these are things that you need. It's not debatable. And then you have these, socially constructed issues, which are arguably unnecessary. Like it's not, necessary that a person experiences that, that kind of turmoil. But you have that in several of the books. Like I said, like you could choose Dear Martin or several others, but I used The Rock and the River. And then I thought it was interesting. So you have one that's kind of external, that's physical, and then you have one that is sort of a social construct. And then Fade I felt like blended the two. So in the sense they were, Paul was partially in the setting and then partially not. And he was like simultaneously protected by being physically present by not being physically present, and then was dealing with it when he was. So it was sort of how setting plays a role in what kinds of struggles these protagonists were facing. And I thought that was highly symbolic of those kinds of struggles.
And you can see the landscape in some of the novels actually becoming a character in the novels. So the landscape of Pravana's journey, the descriptions of the land, the way, the harshness of it, it's not conducive to human life. Mm-hmm. On top of bombs dropping, that the bombs have already dropped and destroyed the country, a country that was once beautiful with trees and streams and such and springs. It's inhospitable at this point, and so it becomes something of an antagonist in the novel, and serves as an actual character. That could probably tie into it as well.
And yeah, I think you said that a lot better than I did. But yeah, basically looking at how those, you really did. I swear it was like, as soon as I was thinking of like the city as a social construct and then it mirroring this like issue as a socially constructed race, I was like, oh, I want to do something with that. But I was having such problem like articulating it. But you said it really well. And I thought it was a really good piggybacking off of our conversation of the different kinds of conflict. But I completely agree. In all of them, they serve as obstacles in that way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's not enough to have bad parents. You have to have a bad landscape to go with it. Yeah. Okay, Shay. I know you're having a bite to eat.
Oh, excuse me. Sorry.
Okay, so tell us about what you're, not that you do anything on mothering, but what you're posting.
Well, I kind of jumped off from what we talked about last week, as far as like the gendered mothering goes, just because it like I said last week, it really kind of stuck out to me that it really seems like the relationship between mother and daughter in most of the novels we read, and mother and son were very different. And I looked specifically in my explanation this week at the Revolution of Evelyn Serrano and Feed, because we saw a really strong relationship between Evelyn and her mother, and then a practically non-existent relationship between Titus and his mom. And I'm just curious as to why that might be, if it's really a gendered thing or if it's just, part of the storyline. But even in some of the other novels we read, like even with The Rock and the River, the relationship between their mom and the boys, while you could tell she cared about them, there wasn't much emphasis on it. Like that relationship was more about the father and the boys. And I kind of wonder if it would have been written differently if one of the young vocalizers had been female. If she would have had more of a role as a mother if one of the kids had been a girl. And so I kind of thought that it would be an interesting larger project because I admittedly don't have a whole lot of adolescent lit reading behind me. So I kind of want to start going through a whole lot of the literature and see if it's something that is common between mother and daughters having a stronger, more supportive relationship, and mothers and sons having a more non-existent or even just a more distant relationship, less supportive, and all of that sort of thing. I just found it really fascinating, I guess because I'm a mother of both.
And I'm thinking about Parvana, or the breadwinner, which is the father plays a pretty major role in that. I can't remember. That's the first of Parvana, or comes before Parvana's journey. And I can't remember the role the mother plays in that. I think she was. And I don't remember the relationship, but the relationship between the father and Parvana were much more important than the relationship with the mother and Parvana. I don't know what that means. And I've read a lot of adolescent novels, and I don't have a quick answer for you. That's for sure. I'd have to just start picking up novels and thinking about them again, and those various relationships.
Yeah, it just stood out to me in a lot of the novels that we read. So I think I might make it a larger project down the road.
Okay. More caring and supportive of the daughter over the son. That's an interesting question. Guess what? Now we get to go to those face-to-face folks. Jeannie, Dying to Survive. Nice twist.
Well, it seemed that as you said, death is a pattern in adolescent literature, and so it's a requirement because not a requirement because it's not there, but anyway, it sets the main character on their journey, and most of them then find their way to thrive, or at least survive. I think there are degrees. I think in you said it. Oh yeah, Esperanza and Parvana. I think they just keep going. I don't know how elevated their prospects looked. I could not, in good conscience, include Bede because I did not see Titus thriving. So I
nobody thrives there.
Excluded that, but really many of them, even if the death is kind of figurative, like in Junior Brown, I said, well, the imaginary guy died, and
the relative.
Yes, the relative who was sick. Which caused his mental breakdown to really kind of set him on a better pattern. So it seems as if they have to have a horrible, influential death. Not just a death. The person is the death, but for the survivors, the death is the old life.
That's an interesting prospect. I can say maybe a little bit to, okay, so children's lit, young children. Their literature is about learning the rules, being introduced to the rules, cultural rules. Adolescent literature is about experimenting to some degree with those rules. And young adult literature, to a great degree, is about resisting those rules and figuring out how to successfully navigate around those power structures. So those are the kind that, and that's very broad because there are lots of crossovers in all of it. So that, as I said, the death is part of young adult literature because there's death in adolescent literature, but it so frequently happens more off stage than it does in their face. Where young adult literature, it's in their face. Like Stick. And Violet. Yeah, in their face.
But some of the deaths, like say in Parvana's journey, that we started that book at the funeral, I think, didn't we? So that was had already happened.
Emily, you're up next. Concerning the counter narrative, listening to
narratives that matter.
Okay.
So I wanted to focus on just like the counter narratives, and I was kind of thinking, like as everybody else was talking, how I want to set this up because I focus specifically on counter narratives that deal with police brutality. So Dear Martin and The Rock in the River. and giving a voice to individuals that previously didn't have one, but then counter narratives are also problematic in that it's somebody else telling and the story and it's not actually them. But I was just focusing on police brutality and what we see in the media today, which is not that it's a bad thing, because my uncle's a cop and I know that he does his job for a reason and he helps a lot of children that are abused. But you kind of have this mentality now with the media that the police are there to protect, and that's not always the case because they're human too.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And to protect who?
Right. And so I think that listening to these narratives, it matters. And it's not necessarily that you're saying that like all cops are bad by saying that bad cops exist. It's just that that's, and there was something else that I was going to say and I lost it. Oh yeah, and so how, I kind of was playing with this question, like how do we institute the counter narrative in a way that it becomes beneficial? And these like stories that include counter narratives kind of, I think, get pushed under the rug a lot. But I just found it very interesting that we've created a dynamic, and at least in this classroom, that has fostered the counter narrative as the narrative.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just like a reading list and then there's one book in there where it's just like, okay, this is the counter narrative and it's including a voice that promotes activism. It's talking about this minority and marginalization, but we've kind of fostered this environment where the counter narrative, although it is a counter narrative, isn't really.
It becomes the narrative.
Right.
Yeah. The main narrative of this class.
Right. And so I found that really interesting, but also important for just classrooms in general.
Uh-huh. That it's not, the counter narrative is not an oddity.
Right.
It's not counter anymore.
It's not counter
Exactly.
anymore.
Yeah.
But it is still. And it will be for a while. We've got time for one more. Who's coming up?
You got time for all.
We do? Is there no class this evening? Okay.
How long you want to?
We'll only go to 7 because I never get breaks. I never get that 10, 15-minute break. Okay. Right there.
Okay. I would finding a genuine sense of self. I put adolescent stage as is a crucial stage in anyone's life because this is the stage that actually determines what kind of person an adolescent will be once he leaves this stage for the adulthood. So this is the stage that identity formation happens because not only in this stage adolescents develop physically, but also they develop kind of mental maturation. So I think all of the novels that we have read during this semester somehow address the notion of identity.
Oh, yes.
All the main characters of these novels are adolescents who are struggling with their real identities, who they really are, but not those identities that have been defined to them by the adults. So you see, most of them are suffering from a kind of identity crisis. I put the Right and the River and the Revolution of Evelyn Serrano because to me the identity formation of the main characters of both of these novels is somehow similar. Both of the main characters, Sam and Evelyn, are somehow confused about their real roles. So we see, for instance, Sam doesn't know whether to take the side of his father's peaceful and conservative party or his brother's revolutionary and
to be the rock or the river.
party. Yes. And on the other hand, we see Evelyn doesn't know whether her grandmom is correct or her mom, because her mom is somehow the same as Sam's father. She's very conservative and she's almost opposed to those revolutionary parties. So we see during the incidents of the novels, both of these characters get a kind of increase their mental maturation. And we see, for instance, especially the revolutionary parties like the Black Panther Party for Sam and Young Lords have great influence on these two characters. But so both of these characters at the end of the stories get a new identities, and the real identities. They gain their real identities and they take pride in their new found identities. But this is not the end of the story is not the same in all the novels. Like for instance, in the first novel we read, the Planet
of Junior Brown.
The Planet of the Brown Junior, we see it is a kind of open ending, so we're not sure whether he gains that sort of identity the same as we see in Evelyn Serrano and the Rock and the River or not. But generally speaking, all of these novels somehow address the identity notion, the notion of identity. Whether at the end of the story, the characters gain such identities, the real identities they are after.
Or gain insight to themselves.
Yes.
Yes, very much so. Yeah, that's kind of the function of young adult and adolescent novels, is to figure that out. In the midst of turmoil, generally. It hasn't always been like that. Little House on the Prairie books, for instance, as you know, those I read all of them as a kid, and so there was conflict, but mom and dad are there. It's it's a really wholesome, aside from attitudes regarding Indians. It's Ma says there's no good Indian except a dead Indian. Oh yeah.
Wow.
That's that's in Little House, I think. It's when the Indians come to their house. So yeah, that was one of the but that was a different era that those are being written in. Alex, Papa, can you hear me? Absent versus deified fact.
So we've kind of already talked about this. It seems like there's some pretty consistent themes that in the books that we've read, there's either no father, he either left, was never mentioned, or there's kind of a deified father that the child really, really looks up to and puts on that pedestal. Sometimes it's both. In Torvana's Journey and Esperanza Rising, the father was like really respected, but is now gone, is dead. And I think, as Andrea was saying, it leaves like a void, and does the community step in, do others step in, or does that void kind of linger?
And there's a third one. Okay, so there's the dead father, the deified father, absent father, and there's another one then, the obstacle father. Because those do exist. That they're a major part of that they're detrimental, dangerous sometimes to the young character.
So, like Ozzy's father in Fade would have been an obstacle father.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
I mean, he eventually is absent because he's dead, but
I don't think there's been much written on fathers. That's a paper right there. And there's your 4 categories. And some of them will already be obvious, but then you'd have to figure out exactly what that means. And then you find out compensation, perhaps, how the text compensates, fills that gap.
Julian. Hi. So I'm talking about the Kobayashi Maru. So for non-Trekkie folks, the Kobayashi Maru is a situation that all Starfleet captains or potential captains have to go through, and it's the impossible situation. The only Starfleet captain that has ever beat the Kobayashi Maru is Captain Kirk because he cheated. He rigged it so that he could win. And in the most recent renditions, reboots of the Star Trek movies, they go into the purpose of the Kobayashi Maru is not to win and not to beat a system that's never been beat before, but to figure out what a candidate is going to do in a no-win situation. So, in the Kobayashi Maru, there's a ship, and you can either help the ship and start a war, or you can leave the ship there to certain death and probably torture before, because the Klingons, the bad guys, are going to come in and get them. So I saw a Kobayashi Maru of sorts, like what you were talking about with police brutality, especially with Justice and with Sam and Stick. So because Justice and Sam are in impossible situations. If they follow the directions of the police, they still get arrested. If they don't follow the directions of the police, they get arrested or they die. It's an impossible situation. Regardless of which way you choose, you're screwed. So you go back to the purpose of the Kobayashi Maru is to see the moral fiber of the candidates and their abilities to make sound decisions under pressure. And both Justice and Sam show their moral fiber whenever both of them have opportunities to go and kill the guys who killed their friend and their brother, and they choose not to. And even under extreme pressure, especially with Sam, who has a gun and is pointing it at somebody, he still opts not to use it. And even though didn't have bullets in it, I still don't. Maybe this is Pollyanna, but I still don't think that he would have pulled the trigger, because I think he was intending for it just to be a threat. Mm-hmm. But both boys learned to make sound decisions and learned to make their own way, and it's because they're in these impossible situations that we're taught that underneath level 2 or level 3 ideology of you're responsible for you. You can't control anyone else. You control you and what you do and how you react. And in the end, because I was looking at ideology naturally, and that's where I saw this impossible situation.
You have to write that article just so you can write a title that is the Kobayashi Maru of adolescent literature. Or young adult literature, or whatever. Just so you can do that.
So I can do it. All my Trekkies out there.
Write an article around a title. Okay, so no reading for next week. Yay. For next 3 weeks, for the end of the semester. And be sure to get if you haven't already, post on the discussion board as to the option that you're using under the week 13 through 15 presentations. I've listed it there, so please do that. And I guess I'll see you next week. Oh, kisses. Kisses. Bye-bye.